Wilmington and Delaware are not so different from the vast majority of the world. So although maybe we're special for pumpkin chunking or for having the right to claim the first state, sorry to break it to you all, we're not that unique when it comes to our economic challenges and woes. But that's great news. There's lots that we can learn from other geographies, from other initiatives, and other stories in which the public and private entities have come together to own their future in economic development. So in the regards, our three challenges are that we're really susceptible to a small number of industries. Secondly, due to globalization, those industries are in a very significant state of flux. And thirdly, our future really depends upon spawning and supporting small businesses, which Delaware has some real growth to do coming up. So I don't want to make this all about Delaware, but it's relevant to point out that Delaware's thrived over the past 30 years over 5 industries, which coincidentally all start with C's. That's chemicals, credit cards, the Chancery Court, we get a double C with that one, credit card as well, I forgot that too. Then you have chicken production and car manufacturing. Unfortunately, the 2008 financial crisis ushered in the closing of all car manufacturing in Delaware, and we're not likely to see that reboot. Meantime, globalization has actually brought about consolidation of industry giants within specific industries. We see that right now with the merging of Dow and DuPont, which is having very, very significant impacts on our economies. And thirdly, as mentioned, it's a challenge, but it's also the solution. We need to start developing the right supportive networks to create and to support small businesses to become the next big employers in our region and industry giants throughout the world. So, with that, I come to talking about 2 specific recommendations that I have for Delaware. I grew up in a military family, by the way, so we like to give bluffs, bottom lines up front, because otherwise a lot of the seniority would leave the room if you don't get to the message right away. And the 2 things that we need that I suggest Delaware can learn from the rest of the world and which we can do for ourselves is to first support a new innovative entrepreneurial ecosystem by actually creating a bricks and mortars facility to assist companies like mine. And I'll talk about my own personal story in that regard in a second. Second one is we need to finance it in a sustainable fashion that puts the right stakeholders into play to actually see it all the way through to fruition to the point of financial sustainability and to giving true metrics of success on the back end without killing the project beforehand. So, we will be focusing on Delaware, but these stories, as mentioned, are not unique to us. There's lessons in similar stories taking place in Detroit and Pittsburgh, for example, with dealing with the changing car and steel manufacturing industries. I lived for quite some time in the Research Triangle Park area, and there's lessons to be learned there as well of combining the academic forces and looking at the future of the industries as to where they're going down the road to be the forefront of leading the advancement of that globally. And then there's also hard stories and perhaps burn marks to learn from that are very relevant to us in terms of what Binghamton or Rochester, New York might have struggled with the massive downsizing of IBM and Eastman Kodak, respectively. So, to my first recommendation, a supportive entrepreneurial innovation center for Delaware. My first company, Elkerton, spun out of the University of Delaware about 7 years ago. We paid 2 times market rate to be here in Delaware. And we were actually given the opportunity to double our startup capital or even exceed our startup capital by moving to other states, such as Kentucky and North Carolina, in order to uproot us to hopefully we would grow there. However, for us, very much like an American Express commercial, the true priceless facet of Delaware was the industry strengths that we have here in chemicals. We all know of DuPont, but Delaware as a whole has 50 plus sustainable chemistry organizations and companies just in Newcastle County. We also have 10 billion-dollar companies with significant employment in Newcastle County as well. And 30% of all the chemistry industry employment resides within a 100-mile radius of this room right here today. So although we could have gotten startup capital elsewhere, For us, the true success of a company really depended upon the business mentors and the folks that could help accelerate and catalyze our industry and move us forward. So, in one event at the Delaware Sustainable Chemistry Alliance, I was fortunate to meet an individual who had recently retired from DuPont. And with about 3 weeks, he was able to get a decision maker from one of the largest German chemical companies to show up in my small lab at the Delaware Biotechnology Institute. We'll step back for a second and recognize that when I started Elkaton, I was a completely naive technologist. I thought my academic publications would obviously attract significant amount of venture capital, right? And it would also have BASF come clamoring to Delaware Biotechnology Institute and say, hey, Bryan, we would love to walk this path of commercialization for you and completely support all these efforts. But that certainly was not going to happen. So that first year was a tremendous learning curve, and the company would have failed. But tapping into the chemical industry in the activities here in this region, that's a brain trust second to none compared to anywhere else in the world, was what really allowed my company to survive and thrive. Subsequently, 7 years later, that business relationship still exists, and they're slated to be the largest customer for our first product line, to be producing about 75,000 tons of renewable bioacetone in 2020. Now, Delaware's been able to do this because of Innovation Hub in the past that was second to none, called DuPont's Experimental Station, and their Central Research and Development. However, as I mentioned, with globalization, industries are consolidating. And research, for the sake of research within these massive corporations that would create Nobel Prize-winning technologies and subsequently create new multi-billion-dollar product lines, that's a thing of the past. It's not happening any longer. Success within all industries now depends upon grisly entrepreneurs who are willing to perhaps take out a second mortgage on their home in order to take a chance on the technology that they believe in. With the merging of Dow and DuPont, not unlike any other industry giants, they're going to be they're going to be increasing corporate efficiencies in order to drive up shareholder value. And if you're a part of the business, if you're a part of the entity that has no home in a specific business, there's a reasonable chance you will be culled from the herd as these two merge. And unfortunately, that's exactly what's happening here in Delaware with the downsizing of Central Research and Development at DuPont, which, if we look at it historically, we've had a tremendously successful innovation hub for Delaware. Which was that? Which spawned companies such as W.L. Gore, Insight, Cephalon, Endo Pharmaceuticals, and in an order of magnitude of smaller businesses, such as Labware, QPS, Wilmington Pharmatech, and so forth. We've been very, very fortunate to have this hub of innovation fulfilling all of our needs for innovative entrepreneurship. And we need to be mindful now that that's really seen its twilight and its dismantling. So, 3.5 years ago, I'd like to claim to have had the foresight into this idea. But really, it's just an industry I knew quite well and an opportunity I thought was very exciting for Delaware. Myself and two colleagues, Matt Meyer, who's now running for Newcastle County Executive, and Nora Gonzalez, who's Deputy Treasurer of the state of Delaware, we proposed a new strategy to the state of Delaware, the Economic Development Office, and to many stakeholders within the community in order to solve the challenges of our entrepreneurial innovation, which required bricks and mortar structure. And then secondly, everybody bought into it, they loved it, but the question was, how do you fund this? That was the biggest stumbling block. We had all the cheerleaders, essentially half of the folks in this room today, saying, this is great, but how are you possibly going to afford this? Because an entrepreneurial innovation center does not come free. In fact, it costs somewhere in the order of $5 to maybe $15 million. And as mentioned, this is a push now for the public to take ownership of its innovation, to bring to forefront its next big employers. So you assume public entities would come in and fund it. However, startups very often die, and startups, by definition, take time to grow and to be significant employers. And the public only funds opportunities in which jobs are created, personal income tax comes back to them, and that is their source of revenue. in order to justify putting money into this. A startup's going to take 3 at best, 4 more likely, most likely 5, 6, or 7 years in order for such an initiative to succeed, which spans political cycles, which makes public funding almost impossible. Meantime, private entities could come in and see the opportunity to make a real investment case. But it's very risky. Again, it's startups. We're few and far between that actually succeed. And lastly, philanthropic organizations, although they would love to, I think, fund such initiatives, there's only a really small subset of those in the country, if not the world, that can stomach $5 to $15 million. So Matt, Nora, and I embarked on why not innovate, not just on the focus of creating our own entrepreneurial companies, but let's innovate the funding strategy. And that's my bigger message of what I want to share with this room today, because I would like there to be much more force, not just within our community, but nationwide behind this idea. And that is a new pay-for-success approach, whereby we combine public, private, and philanthropic partnerships to fully fund out, for the necessary period of time, across political cycles, initiatives that are going to do tremendous public good to our regions that are ailing in terms of our economic challenges, which is us right here in Delaware. The way this would work out, in the old model, you would have government giving money off to a service provider, our innovation center, for example. That would obviously try to help out our target population of startup companies. And ideally, you get capital projects built, and you get personal income tax raised from jobs created, and you get a return on that investment back to the public entity, City of Wilmington, State of Delaware. But as mentioned, for all the reasons, it's highly unlikely to ever take place. Alternatively, let's put private money into there and drive real due diligence in that process to get a real return for the original investor who expects an investor return on that project. Moreover, you add an intermediary in that step. That intermediary is responsible for raising that capital from banks, from pension funds, from organizations that have stakeholder interest in the technologies to be developed. And they disseminate those funds to the service providers, and they drive real performance. The performance subsequently is evaluated by a third-party evaluator agreed upon everybody to say, did you actually create the economic return that you claim you are going to do? Those results are shared with everybody, obviously, but most particularly go back to the public entity in which this is going to be benefiting. And they can provide reimbursement or return. We talked about it earlier, the woes of recidivism that we have here in Delaware. This has been applied first as social impact for reduction of recidivism, for public initiatives that aren't going to drive revenue for the public entity, but are rather going to create cost savings. Now we're talking about a tool for economic development. And as mentioned, we detailed this. We got buy-in from banks, philanthropic organizations in the state of Delaware to do this. But unfortunately, we hadn't the legal vehicle to do this at the time. We needed new legislation, perhaps in the state, in the General Assembly, to make something binding that they could sign. So the project kind of went on the shelf, and is certainly being rebooted today in light of the changes of what's happening in our chemical industry. So, meantime though, over those 3.5 years, where this sat on a shelf, 34 states have pushed forth or now have in consideration new legislation within their general assemblies to create this exact vehicle for funding public good projects across political cycles into a much larger tune that can put in private money, philanthropic money, and have it all be paid for by public entity with zero risk to taxpayer dollars up front. But at the same point in time, allowing the public to own its economic future. Delaware is not one of those 34 states. So, right now we sit at the precipice of challenges, which me as an entrepreneur, I see as opportunity. An opportunity to look at this beautiful building that we're in today and understand the legacy in which much of Delaware has been created, and have the opportunity now to have all of us publicly participate in the fate of the new economic future for Delaware with new funding strategies, with building upon our legacy strengths to drive new industries, and to do this, hopefully, at no risk to our taxpaying dollars.